What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 8 top 35 wide receiver rankings. It's bye Mageddon. We have 6 different teams on bye, so it's very possible you're going to have to dig deep, potentially look at your bench, maybe add someone off of waivers to play in your lineup this week. But let's just dive right into Tier 1, and I'm going to start it off with Jamar Chase. It was looking sketchy, with the few games with Jake Browning at quarterback. But in the last 3 games, Jamar Chase has just been an absolute monster. He's put up 29, 25.1, and 38.1 PPR points. In his 2 games with Joe Flacco, he has commanded 35 total targets. So Jamar Chase is going to be my wide receiver 1 this week. Then I have Rashee Rice, who made his season debut in Week 7. Didn't even have like a crazy route participation, only ran a route on 48% of dropbacks. Now that is skewed a little bit because, the starters got pulled, didn't play into the fourth quarter. But even when it was all the starters out there, like Xavier Worthy was still the clear-cut wide receiver 1 in terms of routes, but the usage was fantastic. He was targeted 9 times, caught 7 of them for 42 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Commanders are giving up the 10th most points per game to the wide receiver position, and it is just very clear that Rashee Rice is going to be the number 1 target. He's going to get peppered with opportunities here, so a locked in tier 1 play. Then I have Emeka Egbuka going up against the Saints. I was honestly pretty surprised that he played this week. I thought he'd at least be missing, the Week 7 game, potentially into Week 8 with the Week 9 bye. But him and Mike Evans both end up playing. Unfortunately, Mike Evans is going to be out for the foreseeable future. We still don't know about Chris Godwin's status. Egbuka didn't have a great fantasy day, but he had a season-high 12 targets. This was honestly just like a rough Baker game. I thought it was definitely his worst game of the season. He was inaccurate on a lot of throws. Missed Egbuka badly on what should have been like a deep shot touchdown. I think better days will be ahead here for the Bucs. They're one of the top teams in implied points this week. Emeka Egbuka, when healthy, has been a monster. He is still a tier 1 play for me. Then I have CeeDee Lamb going up against the Broncos. Obviously, you don't love to see that Patrick Surtain matchup, but you're going to play CeeDee Lamb here, even though the Broncos are allowing the fewest points per game to the wide receiver position. In CeeDee Lamb's 3 healthy games, he has not gone for under 110 receiving yards. CeeDee Lamb, he's a stud, locked and loaded in your lineup. And then my last tier 1 option, it's going to be Justin Jefferson going up against the Chargers. In Jefferson's last 3 games, he's commanded 32 total targets. He's caught 22 of those for 328 yards. The only thing that's really been holding back Jefferson's fantasy production is the lack of touchdowns. In that 3-game stretch, like I said, 32 targets, over 300 yards, has not scored a single touchdown. Now, he did have a play that probably should have been a touchdown. I think more often than not, he makes the play in Week 7, but unfortunately didn't come through. You're obviously still going to be starting Jay Jettis. Then moving into Tier 2, going to start off this tier with Drake London. He's been targeted at least 10 times in each of the last 3 games. The Falcons have the 6th highest implied point total this week. I will point out that Drake London hasn't been the same dominant wide receiver 1 with Darnell Mooney in the lineup compared to Darnell Mooney out. Now, I still think he's a solid option this week. I have him here at wide receiver 6, but that is what kind of holds him back from being with those tier 1 guys. After London, I have Courtland Sutton going up against the Cowboys. Sutton scored at least 16 PPR points in 5 of his 7 games this season. On paper, this is a great matchup. The Cowboys are allowing the 7th most points per game to the wide receiver position, and the Broncos have the 7th highest implied point total this week. Up next, I've got A.J. Brown going up against the Giants, and this really did feel like a breakout performance here from A.J. Brown. In Week 7, he had 4 receptions for 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Giants are allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. I had talked about this over the last few weeks, but the volume had been there for A.J. Brown. Throughout his career, he has been an ultra-efficient option at the wide receiver position. I felt like that was going to swing back in his favor at some point. It did seem like we saw that in Week 7. Then I've got Garrett Wilson going up against the Bengals. Now, there's no guarantee he plays in this game, dealing with a knee injury, but if he does play, I still think he's a wide receiver 1, regardless of who he's got at the quarterback position, Justin Fields or Tyrod Taylor. Then I've got Rome Odunze going up against the Ravens. Now, he had a really strong start to the season. In the first 4 games, he was averaging 8.8 targets and 19.9 PPR points per game. In the last 2, post-bye, only 5.5 targets per game, and then 5.2 PPR points per game. I think this is a good bounce back opportunity here against the Ravens. They're allowing the 5th most points per game to the wide receiver position. Also, the Bears are underdogs, so potential trailing game script, more passing volume, not full-blown panicking here on Rome Odunze. And then the last guy in this tier is going to be George Pickens. Like I talked about with CeeDee Lamb, it's not a great matchup here against the Broncos, but I still feel good about Pickens. In week 7, even with Lamb back, 6 targets, 4 receptions for 82 yards. This passing attack has just been so solid. Dak is playing at a really high level, and George Pickens has also emerged as like a truly legit, like solid fantasy option. And with Lamb out, obviously he was like a high-end wide receiver 1. I still think he's going to be in like that back end wide receiver 1 range. Now moving into a very, very large tier 3, this is pretty much like the very end of the wide receiver 1s through like your back end wide receiver 2s. I'm going to start it off with Zay Flowers going up against the Bears. Now, this is going to be assuming that Lamar Jackson's back based on the Vegas projections, the betting lines, the implied points. It does seem like that's what they're anticipating. We saw Zay Flowers have a really nice start to the season with Lamar. Once Lamar went down and you're dealing with like Cooper Rush, Huntley, his production definitely took a hit. The Bears are also allowing the 9th most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position, so a solid matchup also. Then I've got Devonta Smith going up against the Giants. Like I talked about with A.J. Brown, it's a good matchup. Devonta Smith is also coming off a massive Week 7, 11 targets, 9 receptions for 183 yards and a touchdown. Then I've got T. Higgins going up against the Jets. It really seemed like with the Joe Burrow injury, like T. Higgins might be borderline unplayable moving forward, but he's had 2 really solid games with Joe Flacco at quarterback. First week with Flacco, 8 targets, 5 receptions for 62 yards. The second week, 10 targets, 6 receptions for 96 yards and a touchdown. What I do like about Flacco is that he's just going to give his top weapons opportunities. He's going to throw them 50-50 balls. He is going to really concentrate his overall targets on those top dudes. That's obviously going to be a big plus for T. Higgins, and then obviously Jamar Chase. Then I've got Michael Pittman going up against the Titans. The Colts are first in implied point total this week. Pittman averaging 14.6 points per game. He's the wide receiver 18 so far. Nice, solid, pretty consistent wide receiver 2 play. Then I have Jalen Waddle going up against the Falcons. I honestly considered Waddle both lower and higher. He had 2 really strong performances in his first 2 full games without Tyreek Hill, but week 7 was really rough. Obviously, like the conditions were bad. Wasn't great for a guy like Tua who doesn't have the craziest arm. But Waddle was targeted 4 times, caught 1 of them for 15 yards. And then just matchup-wise, like this is not great. The Falcons are allowing the 2nd fewest points per game to opposing fantasy wide receivers. So I still think Jalen Waddle's a solid play, but not quite as bullish on him as I was over the last few weeks. Then I have Chris Olave going up against the Buccaneers. And Olave had kind of seemed like this early season PPR scam where the efficiency was terrible. He had no touchdown upside, but you could pretty much just bank on like 10 targets a game and like being a decent option in PPR formats. But over the last 2, he went 6 for 98 and then most recently 5 for 98 and 2 touchdowns. So he's, putting together some plays down the field. We saw him get into the end zone twice in week 7. Definitely just solid developments for Chris Olave. Then I'm just going to rank all 3 of the Chargers wide receivers back to back to back. Kind of feels like a cop-out, but I can't firmly take a stand on like which guy I actually prefer at this point in week 8. So going Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen. Ladd McConkey's last 2 games have been his best 2 of the season. 24 total targets combined in those 2 matchups. Then I have Quentin Johnston, really strong start to the season. In his first 4 games, did not go for under 70 receiving yards. His last 2, not as great, 4 for 40, and then 2 for 30 and a touchdown. I still think he's someone who's going to be very playable moving forward. And then for Keenan Allen, he had not hit 11 PPR points in his previous 3 games. Then he goes out in week 7, monster performance, 14 targets, 11 receptions for 119 yards and a touchdown. After those Chargers guys, I've got DK Metcalf. This might seem low. He's averaging a respectable 14.4 points per game. It's just that his floor is so low. He is so reliant on touchdown upside and big plays. Like he's only averaging 6 targets per game. That's just really not cutting it to give you really any sort of floor or ceiling. Because like even if he's hitting on those 6 targets, you're turning it into like 5 for 100 and a touchdown. That's a great game. But when we're talking about like those crazy high ceiling performances, you do just need more in the volume department. And then my final player in this tier, it is going to be Jordan Addison, someone who I didn't think would have a super high ceiling this season. Obviously, like the clear number 2 behind Justin Jefferson. There were some questions about the quarterback play, but he has logged 3 really solid games in his only 3 games of the season: 4 for 114, 5 for 41 and a touchdown, and then most recently 9 receptions for 128 yards. He's commanded 26 total targets in those 3 games. Now moving into tier 4, going to start it off with Tedero McMillan going up against the Bills. Weeks 1 through 5, he looked like he had a pretty high weekly floor, at least 8 targets in all of those games. Then week 6 and 7, week 6 he gets into the end zone twice. That's awesome. But back-to-back games, he's only combined for 10 total targets. Now Bryce Young is out. I think Andy Dalton, honestly, I really don't think it's a hit to Tedero McMillan. I think you could even make the case that it's actually a positive for him, just more of like a locked-in pocket passer. I like Tet as like a back-end wide receiver 2 option. Then I've got Ricky Pearsall going up against the Texans. No guarantee that he makes his return from his knee injury. The Texans have not been a great matchup for wide receivers, allowing the 5th fewest points per game, but the 49ers need weapons at the wide receiver position. Ricky Pearsall had looked really good early on in the year. You're just hoping he can potentially come back this week and be productive. Then I've got Deebo Samuel going up against the Chiefs. Honestly, I don't know how to evaluate this like entire Commanders offense. Jaden Daniels banged up with a hamstring injury. Deebo Samuel with his heel injury missed week 7. Terry McLaurin also banged up with his quad injury. So are both the wide receivers playing? Is Jaden Daniels playing? I have no clue at this point. I did rank both wide receivers. I do slightly prefer Deebo, but without Daniels, like it's tough to get super excited about these dudes. So right now he's going to be my wide receiver 25. At wide receiver 26, I have Wan'Dale Robinson going up against the Eagles. Back-to-back really strong performances, 6 for 84 and a touchdown, and then most recently 6 for 95. Then I've got Stephon Diggs going up against the Browns. Still not playing like elite wide receiver 1 snaps and routes. 75% route participation. Very solid week 7 receptions for 69 yards. A couple more guys in this tier. Xavier Worthy going up against the Commanders. Like I mentioned, Xavier Worthy was like the clear number 1 in terms of snaps, routes. He actually led all wide receivers by 15 snaps and then also by 11 routes. The issue is that he just hasn't been like super heavily targeted. In his last 2 games, he's had 5 opportunities in each of them. Still has the big play upside, still has the touchdown upside on this very good offense. They have the 2nd highest implied point total, but the weekly floor is also pretty low. And then the last guy in this tier, it's going to be Romeo Doubs going up against the Steelers. In his last 3 games, he has commanded at least 8 targets and gone for at least 55 yards. So finding like a decent level of safety and floor, at least in terms of like the volume and just his overall production. Then looking at tier 5, this is where I feel like we're getting into some of the sketchier plays, guys that I don't necessarily love in my lineup. We've got Terry McLaurin going up against the Chiefs, like I talked about, dealing with that quad injury. Hadn't necessarily been an amazing fantasy option when he was healthy, and then we'll just kind of see on the status of Jaden Daniels. At this point, it's more of like a respect to his talent, and then hoping this team can just get healthy, including Terry. Then I've got Khalil Shakir going up against the Panthers. Nothing crazy this season, 10.7 points per game. You're just betting on like a solid, decently safe wide receiver on a really good offense. And then the last guy in this tier, Rashid Shaheed going up against the Buccaneers. He's kind of been a solid fantasy option, 11.2 PPR points per game. He's been targeted at least 5 times in every single game this season. And then it's not a super high bar, but he's hit at least 8 PPR points in 6 of his 7 games. For someone who is known as like kind of like a boomer bust, big play guy, that is a pretty decent floor. You compare him to a guy like, Jameson Williams, who's kind of in that similar archetype. Like J-Mo's just had like some complete clunker games like we saw last night. Rashid Shaheed has not really had those. And then the 6th and final tier, don't feel super confident with these guys, but I'll start it off with DJ Moore going up against the Ravens. He has scored under 10 PPR points in 5 of his 6 games this season, but he also has not scored under 7.8. So he's had somewhat of a steady floor, but there's just been like 0 upside. And I'm honestly not super optimistic that he's ever going to like fully break out this year and be a super strong weekly option. Then I've got Kayshon Boutte going up against the Cleveland Browns. Now, I think his weekly floor is very low. He is not guaranteed pretty much like any base targets in this offense. But he's been solid. He's had some fun games in his last two. He went 5 for 93 and 2 touchdowns. This past week, 2 for 55 and a touchdown. He's got 4 touchdowns on the season. Good offense attached to Drake May. Does have that big play upside. So win a week with a lot of buys. I think he's a fine like back end wide receiver 3. And then the last guy in this tier is going to be a rookie in Matthew Golden. Now, he really hasn't had any crazy games, but the usage was pretty solid in week 7. 82% raw participation. And then just the last 4 weeks, like I said, it's nothing crazy, but he's at least giving you something. 4 for 52, 5 for 58, 3 for 86, 4 for 37. It does seem like he could potentially be building to a solid breakout game. So that is going to wrap it up for my top 35 wide receivers. If you guys enjoyed the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.